Oh, it's stopping at the same place. Oh, wait. Now it's going
Now
forward.
streaming.
Yeah. And they're probably going to be seeing this part with me saying how the YouTube stream didn't work yesterday, but that's just fine. So, welcome into how the sausage is made, everyone. Thanks. And now I hear myself on the YouTube feed. There we go. So, if you're scrolling back to hear that, wonderful. You're seeing that we overcame some tech issues that we had yesterday. I'm Dane Young from UGAsports.com, and this is Brent Rollins from Pro Football Focus and from UGAsports.com. We have been doing some NFL draft previews, and now this is a recap. Brent, the draft has come and gone, and some UGA players have new NFL teams. And one of our goals today is just to discuss how the former Georgia Bulldogs fit into their teams in the NFL.
Yeah, and I mean, we spend so much time talking about the draft because there's no actual. Once the Super Bowl ends and then the draft begins, there's limited transactions, so we have that to talk about all the time. And it's fun to actually really look at how it went out and how things played out, because you think it's going to play out one way and then it completely flips. Like, you think, both you and I were thinking, all right, we thought when you look at the big picture view of the draft, statistically, and I'm saying statistically, like from grading and the things that we do at PFF, Justin Fields should have been in the conversation at 2 and/or 1, not necessarily 3, and then definitely not necessarily 11 that he ended up with Chicago. So that this draft and the QBs, 5 going in the first 15 picks, like, that's all ultimately going to be what's remembered about this draft. But there was some other interesting, like, big picture thoughts. So what were some of your big picture thoughts from the draft?
Well, the first round, I thought it really was the line of demarcation was 5 with the Bengals. Were they going to go tackle? Were they going to go receiver? I think we all felt the first 3 picks would be quarterbacks. There was some question about what San Francisco would do. I think it makes sense what they're doing now. Trading up to get Mac Jones didn't make a whole lot of sense to me to begin with. And that's not a shot on him. I think he's got a chance to be a really good player in New England, but getting Trey Lance together with Kyle Shanahan, if he's an accurate passer, it's going to be a slam dunk. I mean, that's the only question that there is, because he's a good runner, physical guy, history of good health, not a lot of miles on that body, which I think is helpful for what Shanahan's probably going to want to do with him. And then, at that point, the Falcons look at it and say, okay, do we begin to turn the page on Matt Ryan with Justin Fields, or do we give Matt Ryan a weapon and really kind of give the offense another tool, a generational weapon, at least by draft standards, and Kyle Pitts? And so I don't think they could have gone wrong either way. In 5 years, maybe we'll think differently, depending on what Justin Fields has done and then where the Falcons are at quarterback at that time.
Yeah, and the Fields evaluation is going to be such an interesting one, because like we said when we did the preview, everything about him from a statistical standpoint and a grading standpoint said just elite. Mm-hmm. And evidently, though, when you think the fact that he dropped to where he did, and even more so the fact that someone like Carolina or someone like Denver didn't take him, and they're saying, all right, we're going to take Drew Lock and Teddy Bridgewater. Like, if I'm Denver, Drew Lock and Teddy Bridgewater, I'm okay with that and not taking him. But the NFL evaluators evidently thought, to me, and I think I heard this, I don't know where I heard this described, but the Carson Wentzian type traits that Fields possesses in terms of holding onto the ball and trying to make plays down the field as a passer and not necessarily getting rid of it and living to play another day. Like, will that eventually get changed in the NFL? Who knows? But I agree. And the other thing you said, the Bengals at 5, that brought up two big trends for me. One is, like, you only saw one offensive lineman in the top 12 picks, and that was Sewell at 7 to Detroit. So, versus last year, we had the 4 tackles in the top 13, I think. And then also you had that quarterback receiver reunion. Now, obviously, because of the Bama connection there, 2 of those are that. Hurts with Smith now, and then Tua has Jalen Waddle. But the Bengals taking Chase over Sewell, which I think actually was the correct choice for them. And based upon their team, I think T. Higgins now becomes a big-time number 2 for them. So I think that was there. Outside of that, the SEC dominated as it has forever. Like, it's not a debate in terms of where the most talent, and the recruiting rankings and then also the draft tells us that every year. Football is different and things happen in games, but from a talent perspective, it is the SEC is and always will be king.
That Bengals pick to me was symbolic of a change in mindset to where it used to be if you have a young quarterback and he's struggling with protection in front of him, then you go fortify the offensive line. And not saying that still doesn't help, it does. But one thing that we're seeing is the way the Bengals help Joe Burrow is getting him another weapon so he can get the ball out faster. And if we go back to LSU, he made decisions so quickly. He's got good feet. He can scramble around a little bit. And typically, and you and I discussed this, you can find offensive linemen in other places. Now, you don't want to leave yourself in a situation like the Chiefs were in the Super Bowl to where you're essentially having a group of free agents on the offensive line due to injuries, but that was a situation out of their control. If you can prepare for it, there are other options out there. I think the Falcons are doing a decent job of kind of using that mindset too. One thing I did want to mention, and we'll kind of transition into Georgia's first pick with this, is that quarterback selection for the Bears. If I would have told you this time last week, rank the quarterback situations in that division with the Packers, the Vikings, the Bears, and the Lions, you probably would have said the Bears had the worst situation with Andy Dalton.
Yes.
You're looking at Kirk Cousins, Aaron Rodgers, and then I guess Jared Goff. That's not a great situation either. So, but if you look at it after the draft, you're like, wow, did that move really put the Bears at the most favorable position considering Aaron Rodgers once out of Green Bay?
Like, and from and that's a great point. And that's also to me, like if I'm the Falcons and feeling good, make me feel a little better. Like all that Rodgers stuff should make me feel a little better about my Kyle Pitts pick. Like, hey, I might have a window now and things might fall where everybody else has flaws and one injury here, one injury there. And our offense is good enough to put us in a position to do some things.
Well, and that pick that the Packers made, yet again, they use a first-round draft pick on something that does not help Aaron Rodgers at all. And that's been a trend for a long time in Green Bay. It just so happens that it's the first Georgia player off the board in Eric Stokes. So we're going to quickly go through each player that was drafted from UGA and kind of discuss how they fit in with that team. I feel bad for Stokes in some way because you just see this team kind of on the edge of a rebuild. And obviously it's cold in Green Bay too. So that may be a tough adjustment for a Georgia boy. That said, he's going to have a chance to play and play early. And that's what first round picks should do. Just really, proud of him, I would say, which is weird for, a media outlet to say, but to where he was in rankings, to use college the way that he did, to be able to be a first round pick in the NFL, took advantage of every opportunity. And we've seen that for 3 years at Georgia. It's
the complete and utter definition of development. Like you can't describe it. If you look in the dictionary, at least online and under development, there should be a picture of Eric Stokes because that's what that is. That's, hey, I am this way when I start at one point, much like if you think like as a random NBA reference, Giannis. Mm-hmm. Like Giannis, when he first got to the league, was just such a beanpole. And now he's such a freak of nature physically and has grown and developed his game. It's much like what Stokes has done is that he's developed physically, gotten better, and competed, and just again, and you talk about the spot he landed in. So outside of Jair Alexander, they have Jair Alexander on one side, phenomenal corner, a young corner. After that, it's very, very bad for Green Bay. And you saw Kevin King, who I think is also a young corner, get absolutely torched twice. The big one, the right before the half in the NFC Championship game. So I think, and what's interesting about that is the way early mocks that right after the Super Bowl, a lot of them had Green Bay taking corner because of that reason. So, while the stuff with Rodgers makes it different, but still for their team and the betterment of their team, I think corner was the right selection. Yeah, it does help their defense as they kind of move forward again. I do think with whatever transition at quarterback, unless Jordan Love is great, and he may be, I think that there's a potential rebuild coming. I made a joke on Twitter today that Brett Favre is getting ready to his comeback, and that would just be wonderful. Hey, Ed Warder's already from ESPN's already sent him a text. They've already discussed it. Stokes was pick number 29 in the first round, and it showed how close he and Tyson Campbell were in evaluations, that they were only selected, 4 picks apart from each other. Mm-hmm. Tyson Campbell, first pick of the second round, he goes to the Jacksonville Jaguars to join a revamped group of what Urban Meyer is doing there. And we heard on yesterday's UGA Sports Live, and we'll talk about this at the end too when we get to the undrafted free agents, a pair of Georgia corners going to Jacksonville, and Urban Meyer very thrilled about that. What are your thoughts on Tyson Campbell's fit there? They need help everywhere. Obviously, when you're 1-15, you have the first pick in the draft, you need help everywhere. But I think the biggest thing and most interesting thing is the fact that you have him now he will play opposite or on the opposite side at corner of former top 10 pick and Florida Gator, CJ Henderson. So you have a Gator on one side and a dog on the other side now in Jacksonville. So I think the irony there is pretty cool.
I think the other thing too is that with the Jaguars going Trevor Lawrence and Travis Etienne, it really shows a lot of faith in Campbell that, yeah, we know we need help on defense too, and you're going to be the guy that begins to transition that. Although I will say Jacksonville's defense, they have athletes, man. There are guys over there that were tremendous in college and have proven to be pretty good in the pros. It's almost like a lack of cohesion, that there's a couple of holes, and cornerback is one of those, that if they can rectify that, they could come together pretty quickly.
And if you think about the last, I read Dave McMahon's Stats Guy's article about, just random nuggets within the draft. The last Georgia player taken in Jacksonville, Marcus Stroud. That worked out pretty well for them. So hopefully for Campbell, he can be that as well.
Random story. Gosh, this was probably 20 years ago now. Marcus Stroud got pulled over for speeding in Lawrence County, where I grew up, and my dad was on the potential jury for the trial. He was going so fast, they had to go to trial, and he had to show up for that. And so one of the questions that the judge asked the potential jurors is, all right, so who here is a Georgia fan? And I think every hand went up, and so he got out of it because of that, which was kind of funny. That's my Marcus Stroud story. He has a lot more highlights beyond that, but that was at least childhood Dane's insight into Marcus Stroud. Another rusher that I think we thought was going to be the first overall pick for Georgia in this draft, that's Aziz Ojulari. Going to the New York Giants, we know that Joe Judge really respects what Kirby Smart and Nick Saban have to say. They have a history of getting Georgia Bulldogs in recent years. I think Aziz goes to a great spot to be able to play early and often for the Giants.
Very much so. And it's the fourth straight year that the Giants have taken a Georgia player. I think the most recent run before that was the Bengals with 4 straight years there with Geno Atkins, Sean Williams, that train of players. But what was interesting is that when we said about Aziz, we thought, all right, at worst he falls to the Ravens. But then when he starts falling and not getting picked, and then you hear on the draft coverage them talk about, or in Twitter as well, some medical need kind of questions. And it's obviously one of those things where it always happens when someone falls, what's going on? Like you heard with the kid from Notre Dame, Owusu Kamara, however you say his name, JOK. But him with a heart thing. You always hear about that stuff as they're falling. Oh, okay, well, thus want to predict this stuff. It'd be nice to know this in the beginning. But we did say, where can Aziz go? As early as 11th to the Giants. And then he ends up at 50 to the Giants. So, I think that from a fit standpoint, it's very good. And obviously with the way Joe Judge coaches, and then with the New England background, I think it's a great fit for him, and he's going to be a good spot.
Those practices will be fun with Andrew Thomas and Aziz Ojulari back together again,
very much
pushing around one another. Hopefully they can stay healthy up there. So that was Georgia's second round picks. Tyson Campbell was the first pick of the second round. Aziz Ojulari was the 18th pick of the second round. Then late in the third, a run on a few Georgia guys altogether, Monty Rice being the first of those, with the third round pick number 29 to the Tennessee Titans. And my favorite thing about this pick was Monty giving the pictures of him wearing the Tennessee Titans gear when he was a child.
Cool.
He's from Northern Alabama, so it makes sense that the closest NFL team in proximity would be in Nashville. So that was really cool to see a bit of a childhood dream come true for Monty.
Very much so. And we had talked about, we knew the first 3 off the board would be some combination of Aziz, Stokes, Campbell. Who would be that fourth guy? I was sort of touting that it would be Ben Cleveland, and we kind of agreed that we thought Monty might end up in that 4th, 5th round range. But when you look at Tennessee as a team, I mean, they have Rashaan Evans and they have a couple other guys, but their linebackers from a grading perspective, they had 0 linebackers above a 65.0 grade. So in terms of early opportunity playing time, the opportunity is there for him to earn it relatively quickly.
And I would say there's probably a previous connection, at least relationship, with Monty Rice and who'd you just mention? You said his name. Linebacker with the Titans.
Rashaan Evans.
Rashaan, yeah. So I covered Rashaan Evans in high school. He was at Auburn High School when they were think they made it to the state championship that year. They had Reuben Foster on that team too. And so with them both being from Alabama, that's going to be a nice connection. Just in terms of what do they say in football all the time? The brotherhood. Oh, that's the Falcons. I'm sorry, that was the old Falcons. We can't say that anymore.
Brothership too. There you go. other Dan Quinnisms.
Round 3.
Started a run. Monty started a run.
He did. Round 3, pick 31. So 2 picks later, Ben Cleveland goes off the board. Got to give you credit here because when we were playing, who does this guy feel like he would go to? You said Ben Cleveland to the Patriots or the Ravens, and sure enough, it's the Baltimore Ravens taking Big Ben Cleveland.
You can just see Cleveland as in Ben Cleveland in those Cleveland Brown matchups against the Steelers and the fit always been, and just fitting perfectly within that. And he's also going to a really good spot because the Ravens, they had one guard who played quite well and played, majority of the snaps. The other guard spot for them was split between a couple of different players, neither of which had above a 60 grade. So below replacement level type players. So his opportunity as well to go in and play and make an impact is going to be quite high.
And this is a bit of conjecture, but it obviously turned heads at Georgia's pro day when Ben Cleveland, especially for a man his size, ran really fast. And I'm not saying that it was, track speed or anything, but a man his size moving that way made a big difference. And that's what you need in front of Lamar Jackson is a big person that can get to an edge if they need to. And Ben Cleveland's proven he can do that. In fact, you might look back at Georgia's offense and say, perhaps he should have done it a little bit more.
Yeah.
And then a couple of picks later in the 3rd round, pick number 34 of the 3rd round, tight end Trey McKitty goes to the Los Angeles Chargers. A bit higher than I would have thought. You and I have spoken a lot about Trey McKitty, mainly from his FSU days. I saw something on when we were doing our preview on Trey McKitty. There were some things I didn't like in terms of effort. He rectified that at Georgia, obviously had a great draft process, and it winds up with him being a 3rd round pick. And
2 things about the spot that he hit one himself is what he did at the Senior Bowl obviously just mattered big time. That was a career changer of him going to the Senior Bowl and performing like he did at the Senior Bowl. And the other thing, and Coach Donovan mentioned this yesterday on the UGA Sports podcast, was him coming to Georgia and then developing and playing well as a blocker. Mm-hmm. That, you'd show, hey, I have receiving skills. You show that at the Senior Bowl and you beat all the people that you beat and do the things you did there. But you also have now the tape from the season as a run blocker. That combination gets you drafted. And plus the Chargers, their tight end is now in New England. Hunter Henry is now with the Patriots, and they had a need there. So he's going to have an opportunity. And what's kind of a theme of these first few picks, or these first 6 picks, 6 picks, is going to be early opportunities to play.
And he'll have opportunities to catch the ball in that offense because Justin Herbert slings it around the field. If you're a fantasy football person, you know that Justin Herbert has a ton of passing attempts, and it helps to get the tight ends and wide receivers involved in that. One of my favorite picks of the draft, and we assumed that it would be this way, came round 5, 25th pick of round 5. Richard LeCounte goes to the Cleveland Browns. And I just thought that there was something kind of fitting, or maybe even beautiful if you want to go that far, with Richard LeCounte being on the same team with Nick Chubb, because they were 2 influential people in Kirby Smart's arrival at Georgia. Chubb staying as long as he did, and then LeCounte being among those first recruits as he was. And so for them to be on the same team, I think it's a perfect spot for LeCounte to be able to get healthy for one, and then contribute, probably starting on special teams.
Yeah, and it's also cool. They're playing in the dog pound. I think the irony there is awesome as well. But the most telling thing about LeCounte was after the draft, Daniel Jeremiah, who you guys had, he had talked about him being that red star player that teams are going to want to have on their team. He put out a tweet that said, based on some data that the NFL teams had, LeCounte's play speed, the GPS numbers, put him in the 90th percentile for the position. Wow. And I'm sitting there thinking, like, you have all these guys run 40 times, but yet you're saying, hey, teams have these GPS tracking numbers. And I think that's truly where, and those teams, a lot of teams have gone that way already. And actually probably sure most of them have, just as much as they're looking at 40. 40 probably confirms as much as anything, or makes you reevaluate the speed times. But, having those GPS numbers and saying, hey, because what that is not only is the 40 time, the injury and all that kind of comes into play. But in the game, he plays super fast. And that's somebody now and the Cleveland's put such an emphasis on defensive backs and the secondary in general and their safeties, Carl Joseph being one of them, former West Virginia guy. Like they've got some issues within the secondary and some playing time that could be there for LeCounte if he gets himself truly healthy.
Georgia's next pick is also going to a position of need for his new team. Trey Hill picked in the 6th round, the 6th pick of the 6th round, going to the Cincinnati Bengals. And obviously Joe Burrow got hammered last year. Kind of reminded me of old school David Carr with the Texans, to where your prized possession is just getting beaten every week. And then the ACL injury, he's recovering from that. So in that sense, Trey Hill's going to have every opportunity to make this team and then potentially, have a lot of playing time. I doubt he would be anything like a day one starter or anything like that. But I do think there's a chance that he can make the roster and be a reserve on this team.
And then him making the roster is what we talked about on the preview, the ability to play both center and guard. Like that's going to have value. The fact that he has played center the majority of his time in college, but also played guard some, that to me is the only thing. Because if you look at the Bengals depth chart, they've had injuries along the offensive line. They've invested in some resources on it in the offseason, both at tackle and then in the draft. It's going to be a tough spot for him to make the roster. I could see him maybe making the practice squad, but that versatility is going to be key.
It definitely will. And, one of the things we talked about also in the preview is the next guy, round 7, pick 13. We said Mark Webb is that guy that, he could be an undrafted free agent, but he's done enough on special teams and he put enough good stuff on tape from his position at Georgia to show that he's worthy of at least getting drafted. And he did. Also going to the Los Angeles Chargers. Again, I think that's going to be a similar situation to Trey Hill. The roster, he'll be among those last guys in terms of roster management. You see it all the time on Hard Knocks where they have to make those tough decisions. Practice squad versus who gets cut outright versus who makes that team. Mark Webb's trying to become a special team star in the NFL. I think it's a decent spot for him to have that attempt. And
that is a big time, sort of tip in the cap in your direction if you can be excel in special teams. And I think that's where he makes his mark initially. And like I said this a long time ago, I think that I see him as a dime third down linebacker type in the NFL. Maybe even someone that puts on another 10 pounds and even turns into a very Keanu Neal type player that in the box on third down and covering guys on the inside.
One thing that his pick proves to you is that even if you're a bit positionless or you're in between positions or you're a hybrid for about 4 things, if you're a good enough athlete and you showed the effort on the tape, the teams will recognize that and at least give you a shot to see how you fit in. He's also the kind of guy that if it doesn't work out initially with Los Angeles, that just because he's young and athletic and can do multiple things, that he's the kind of guy that teams would need mid-season, maybe off of another practice squad or off of a free agent. So, if it doesn't work out there, I could see him bouncing around to a couple of different teams this season. 2 undrafted.
That's now 3 out of 3 out of 4 years that one team, and I think this speaks to the culture at Georgia. And when you see, I see one, I see others, and I like them too. 3 out of 4 years, 2 different Georgia players have been drafted by the same team. So last year you had Andrew Thomas and Tay Crowder. A couple years before that, you had Nick Chubb and I forget who else went to the Cleveland Browns. But so 3 out of 4 years that you've had multiple Georgia players going to one team. That hey, that's coaches coming and being like, all right, I'm here to scout that guy, but I also like that guy too. And then you hear the positive feedback, and it ends up those guys fall in favor in a draft room.
4 defensive backs selected from Georgia, and probably right on the cusp was DJ Daniel, undrafted free agent, is going to Jacksonville to join with Tyson Campbell. One thing that we heard Jim Donnan say that he had spoken with Urban Meyer and said that he was really excited about DJ Daniel. And Donnan went as far to say that he felt really good about Daniel's potential to make that roster. And like you said, Jacksonville needs a little bit of everything. And so as many defensive backs as a roster holds, it's a good shot that he'll make that team.
Yeah, it's one of those things where could he have come back, had a really solid year and, found himself next year in the 3rd round, maybe, possibly. But one of these things where you go to a team now, especially as an undrafted free agent, you kind of get to pick your spot.
Yeah.
Go to a team like that needs help in the worst way and you show out, because you think about the NFL, how much of a passing league has become. 5 out of 11 guys, 75% of the snaps are defensive backs. So you got to, you got to have numbers there. And Jacksonville needs them in the worst way.
One thing, though, you say that Daniels potentially, sure, if he'd have come back to Georgia, could even proved his stock to be drafted. That's completely possible. It's also completely possible he could have come back to Georgia and gotten passed by other players. And I know it's a thin secondary, so the opportunity is there for someone to stand out. But in the instance that it's a thin secondary and he still got passed up by other players, that's the only question he would hear from NFL teams is, man, you should have been the number one guy. Why weren't you? So in that case, I don't know that his spot would have been much better had he come to Georgia. We'll never know. I mean, it's impossible to predict. I think it was a smart move for him, frankly, to get on this team and this roster.
Find a way on a roster as quick as you can. If you can make it, you're going to make it, independent of where you're picked or not picked. If you can make it, you're going to make it, and then you find a way to get to that next contract.
I think Malik Herring is in the same position. If he probably doesn't tear that ACL at the Senior Bowl, maybe he gets drafted late. But great career at Georgia. I actually think that he fits in a great way with the Chiefs, who, when you're as successful as they've been, you're only getting closer to cap hell every year. And so there's going to be tough decision on who gets paid and who doesn't. So a guy like Herring that can come in, have zero expectations, if he's able to make the squad, even as a practice team player, get healthy, I think there's some potential that we'll look up in a couple of years and he'll still be playing for Kansas City.
That, or even for example, at the very end of this season, like, because they're obviously going to play into January. It's just, they have Mahomes. They're going to play well into January every year for the next decade. So getting there and getting healthy and you're in a third down situation in the divisional playoff game, getting a snap or two.
Yeah. Or they're adding an extra game now, right? So you're going to need people for those later games in the season when things are locked up and you just have to play because there's money out there for TV companies to put your game on TV. That's going to happen for some of these guys too. So that is Georgia's draft picks. 9 players drafted. I'll take a little humble brag here. That's what I predicted would happen, although that was a bit of a shot in the dark because how could you really know? We were on the same page with around that 9 or 10 range, and Georgia set a record. What I thought was interesting, though, is the article that you wrote after the draft saying Georgia just set a record, but it's already in jeopardy based on what next year has to offer.
Yeah, and a lot of it's because guys came back. I mean, you have James Cook, Samir White, Jordan Davis, Devontae Wyatt for another year, Jamari Sawyer. I saw him. I read the way – I don't know why I do, but I still read the way too early mocks. And mainly just to see what's going through some of the heads, because I've seen JT Daniels as high as the first pick in some of them. But I also saw Jamari Sawyer in a first-round mock, in a way too early first-round mock. So that's at least – he's on the radar for evaluators. And, you have guys – so those are, in terms of seniors, Cook and White, Jordan Davis, Jamari Sawyer. I think Justin Schaefer has a very Solomon Kinley-esque type deal where he's picked in the middle rounds and just becomes a solid contributor, much like he is at Georgia. Possibly Chris Smith if he has another, keeps playing as well as he did at the end of last year. And then Adam Anderson. And I think Adam Anderson's one who could find himself into that first round category because of the athletic traits, but maybe likely into the second or third round, a better version of like Chris Rumpf from Duke, from a size, speed, combination as a pass rusher only for the most part. But so that's 8. You got 8 seniors there that possible, and there's some others. I mean, you never know. Demetrius Robinson could go run 4.35, and someone takes him in the late rounds or something like that. But then you also have sort of some likely early departures that I put in there. JT, if he has that year that, from a statistical standpoint, that we think is possible, he comes out. George Pickens, and then Tyke Smith, if he is well in the SEC as well as West Virginia in the past few years. So there's at a minimum 11 right there.
Kenny McIntosh would be eligible, right? Or is he 1 year too?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
You never know. I mean, he's a really good athlete. So, I mean, that. So here's one thing I mentioned yesterday on UGA Sports Live is that if you look at the positions where most of Georgia's higher draft picks are going, it's been offensive line, it's been defensive back. two of the positions that Kirby Smart knew he needed to fortify when he got Georgia's job. And there's enough of a sample size now that you can see who comes in and how they get developed and how they get recruited. The thing that we're not seeing so far in NFL drafts, and I think it's only a matter of time, but I really don't know this for sure, is the quarterbacks and receivers being drafted high. And I think that that's going to be the question for Georgia is, are your quarterbacks and receivers explosive enough that NFL teams want to pay them the amount of money that you have to early on, even understanding that the economy of the NFL in terms of roster management has completely changed to where quarterbacks and receivers get drafted higher than ever. Even if a few years ago, I don't think Cal Trask is a high pick a few years ago. It just so happens that now people need quarterbacks more than ever, both on the starter and then to the second string. So what I would say is, who's going to be the receivers at Georgia to emerge? Obviously, George Pickens will be a high draft pick, regardless of his injury situation. There's enough good tape on him. What about Georgia's quarterbacks? Can JT Daniels jump up there and be the Joe Burrow, be the Zach Wilson? Because there's going to be a quarterback that none of us are thinking about now that'll be a lock top 10 pick next year. Personally, I don't see that from JT based on what I've seen and what I know, but I also know that he's good enough that he could get there. And so there's a lot of unknown with that. And until we start seeing that passing excellence get drafted, meaning respected from the NFL, I think that's going to be kind of the bugaboo at Georgia in terms of chasing a national championship.
And and you think about JT, and I actually, I mentioned this earlier on on Bulldog Roundtable on 680 this morning, but to me, he has to have that kind of season from an accuracy standpoint, because the quarterbacks that just got drafted, 6'3" plus, 220 to 225 plus, big, strong, physical, athletic guys. JT
can move in the pocket, and they can all move in the pocket.
He's not that. He's not that. He's just not that build. He's not that type. He's not that type of player. So from an accuracy standpoint, can he have that kind of season? And for him, the best part for him is who his offensive coordinator is. Is if he does these things for that offensive coordinator who is completely tied into all the NFL circles, his opinion will be big time weighted within that. But I think I see him like right now as he is as a mid-round type project, but I think he's going to have a season statistically that puts him into that, like at worst, a Kyle Trask, Davis Mills, Kellen, bottom of the second round type deal. And then if he does it from an accuracy standpoint, because of the supply and demand, by the way, there's the quarterbacks next year is nothing like what we saw this past year from size, speed, and play that we've seen dynamics. So I think the supply and demand might keep pushing him into one of those first or second round type worlds.
And I said that Zach Wilson was a guy this year that a year ago no one saw was going to be a first round pick. It's probably more in terms of JT Daniels comparison. Mac Jones would be that guy, because if you scroll back a year ago, the mass opinion of doofus media people like us was that, oh, they don't have a quarterback. They're just kind of they've got the playmakers
starting by week 3.
Yeah. I mean, have you seen Mac? He's not an athlete. He can't. He proved everyone wrong, and did so in a bit of a legendary way. Helped that he had 2 first round receivers and a first round running back, obviously first round in Alex Leatherwood, and then whoever comes beyond this. I think we both think Evan Neal is probably a first round pick. Does John Mechie become that likely?
Billingsley. To me, Billingsley's going to be is the next freak show.
So go back and look at 2017 Alabama's offense and realize, all those guys are first round picks. I think it's 4 receivers at this point, and 2 quarterbacks. And Jalen Hurts was not a first round pick, but he's an NFL starter now, or at least appears to be with the Eagles. So all that to say, when you start looking back at LSU when they won the title, I think this Bama team that recently won is the same way. And then Bama in 17, a bit of Georgia in 17, you start to see, that's why they were that good. The NFL is kind of proving what we've all been seeing anyway. We need to wrap this up. So your final thoughts on the draft and how it relates to Georgia and its players.
I think the final thought is what we just talked about is, do they take that next step that we think they can and that they should and that they need to from an offensive standpoint. And if that happens next year, when we start talking about the draft, we're going to start talking about more and more of these guys in these early rounds.
And as much as that focus is going to be on JT Daniels, I really think it needs to be on the receivers, because what we're going to learn here in the next 18 months is Marcus Rosemy-Jackson a first or second round wide receiver. At this point, I have no idea. And I don't think anyone would have enough information to make a prediction either way. I know he's a good enough athlete to be that. So now it's all about production.
He shared that on Twitter the other day. I saw.
Oh my goodness. I mean, but you can say that for probably about 5 Georgia receivers right now. But the problem is you could also say that for previous Georgia receivers, because when Terry Godwin got to campus, I was thinking his high school production, his recruiting, everything said that guy was going to be a pretty high NFL pick. Didn't quite work out that way. He's still playing in the NFL, but it's different when you get that first round money and you're able to kind of use that in recruiting to say, look what Jamar Chase did. Look what Devontae Smith did and Jalen Waddle did. So that we both agree that's where Georgia's lacking, and that's what Todd Monken has to figure out. How can he get some of those guys into being first round picks? And more specifically, it's probably Kirby Smart's issue, because he'll be the one dealing with the wake of that and the ramifications of that.
Brent, positive trend though. This like from a Georgia perspective, everything is trending in the right direction. It's not trending in the wrong direction. Very much trending in the right direction.
Georgia's one of the best 5 teams in the country, one of the best 5 programs in the country, on the cutting edge of most things. And so fans should be excited about that. And so Paul Feinbaum told us the national title is only a matter of time. I don't know that that's any consolation to fans out there, but we'll see in the future. Brent, I've enjoyed doing these draft previews and now a recap with you. Our content will continue on UGAsports.com. And then over the offseason, we'll continue to do some of these YouTube lives. If you ever have questions for us, hit us up on Twitter. You can find those really easily. I don't have to say those handles, but we're going to get out of here. And thanks for watching UGAsports.com.